Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome all. Oh gosh. Okay, well, I think we just tuned out there for a second. Welcome back. um, this is Ajahn Nisabho. I'm located in Seattle right now. So this is our weekly YouTube, Facebook Q&A discussion online Dhamma session. So if anyone has questions or topics they'd like to discuss, just type them into the chat. And just a bit of an update for those who are new or returning. I'm in Seattle right now, and we've just begun to form the community here. It's a lovely group that's coming together, and I got the chance to visit Pacific Hermitage this last weekend and pay respects to Longpa Pasano and Ajahn Nisabho, which was a real blessing, and just reminded continually of what amazing teachers they are. Longpa Pasano is a rare Ajahn and a rare being to be near and have access to. I'm writing his biography, and some of the stories, I've mentioned some, but there are so many. One, which might just be fun to start the whole session with, is the story of Longpor in Dowdom, which was a small forest hermitage he started and founded in the jungles of Canterbury. And it's very remote. You have to walk 3 or sometimes 2 or 3 days to get there if you're on foot. So there's a lot of stories from there. 3 which I especially like, actually. Well, 2 for now. But one was that his first rains retreat there, the woman who owned the property, she, I believe, purchased mining rights for the area and was hosting him, had hired a villager to prepare his food in the morning because they were far away from most villages. So the villager didn't know much about Westerners and thought that they only could eat eggs and not other vegetables or Thai food in general. So she made eggs for him, and just eggs, for, I believe, 3 months straight of the entire rains retreat. And Longpo Pasano, being the stoic and content and pretty astounding monastic that he is, didn't complain about it at all or say anything. He just accepted his eggs day after day. And by the end of the Vasa, the rains retreat, he'd become so malnourished that he'd gone blind and couldn't see. And people, the lady got wind of it and admonished the villager until she made him vegetables and things other than eggs. But it's one of many examples of Longpa Pasano's endurance. And the other amazing, well, there's many, but another really wonderful story of him was on one of his first periods during the rains retreat. He was staying out in the jungle, and tigers have a very distinct smell in Thailand, or everywhere, but apparently you can smell them long before you see them. And so it was night, and he had candles lined up against alongside his walking path, and he heard this stepping and smelled that very distinctive smell, and I believe saw the tiger pacing towards him. So he went up onto his, oh, sorry, I have to make sure it doesn't shut off. He went up to his little platform and just decided to meditate there. And it's just a small bamboo platform. I believe that actually this one was a hut, but just a very simple bamboo hut, not much of an obstacle for a tiger. And he reflected, thinking about, well, what do I do if the tiger attacks? And he thought, well, you die. They're much better equipped than you. And so, but he continued to meditate, and the tiger, after a time, sat, I believe, and then wandered away. So all this to say that Longpo Pasno is one of the old guard of forest monastics and a real treasure. And if you're anywhere near Portland these days, or even within 4 hours of driving, it's worth going there for some weekend meal offering or something if you can, and just having a chance to pay respects to a being like that and to ask questions. It's very rare, I think, to meet a monk like that. So my time with him always reaffirms that fact. Feel free to type in questions and other things. Rick, Venerable, can you share some reflections on the benefits and drawbacks of learning from multiple lineages or schools of Buddhism versus learning from just one lineage or school? Is it more skillful to study and practice under the direction of one Theravada monk, or is it more skillful to remain open to learning from multiple Dhamma teachers? Thank you. There's a sutta called the Mahagosinga Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha asks his disciples to say what sort of bhikkhu, monk, they think would illuminate this grove in the night. And they all name these different disciples of the Buddha, whether it be Sariputta, I believe it's the different disciples name monastics who feature qualities that they embody, ones they really value. So, say, Venerable Sariputta is renowned for his wisdom. So, I believe he says something like, a bhikkhu with great wisdom illuminates this grove. And all the different monastics have different leanings. Some are best at memorizing Vinaya, the code. Others are wonderful at going into seclusion and living simply, etc. And in the end, the Buddha comes in and says, a bhikkhu who strives illuminates the grove, really bringing it back to our present moment effort. But what I suppose I bring that into the conversation for is the fact that even in the Buddha's time, just like you have patron saints in Catholicism, you have disciples who embody these qualities. And there's another sutta where it's pointed out that different personality types gather around various teachers of certain leanings and character types. So similarly, I find that it's, in terms of where you draw your Dhamma, I think it is helpful to find a lineage that you feel contained within and held by, with a internal coherence. Because if you do piece together practices from too many places, it gets very confusing and doubt-ridden. And each structure of teaching, whether it be Mahayana or Tibetan, features its own internal logic and process. So taking from a smattering can compromise those. That being said, in the beginning, it is helpful to taste from a various lineages. And I find there's a difference between really keeping a foot in many different lineages versus just, finding one you feel comfortable in and then dipping into these other lineages for skillful means. For example, I deeply value some of the Tibetan means of spreading loving kindness or conceptualizing various practices. My sense is that it's hard to come across that lineage home in a logical manner. There's no equation. You have to experiment and dip into this and that until something feels right. And usually it'll very much be in the chest, intuitive awareness. I've heard someone say karma is intuition, or intuition is karma. So sometimes I think when you hear that teaching that feels right, it really strikes home. And trusting that and moving into that. That being said, I do think it's good if one's practice can align with, and the teachings align with the oldest texts and the core teachings of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Paths, and if possible, those old basis of teachings. And yet, when one finds a home in a tradition, I think it is pretty safe to really branch out and, just like different disciples of the Buddha embodies different qualities, you find different teachers who you rely on for various aspects of your practice. So for everything to do with the suttas and reading into them in a very powerful and penetrating way, I rely on Ajahn Nisabho, Ajahn Jeff. I've lived with him, and I believe I don't know what his IQ is, but it's astounding. His recall of the suttas is immediate, and time and again he performs these amazing feats where he lifts up these old teachings and reorients them all into context of the whole canon because he has such a powerful grasp of it. So I think his sutta knowledge is what I rely on for things of that nature. Similarly, with my breath practice, I rely on Ajahn Jeff largely. When it comes to guiding my whole holy life, basic questions about, what do I do in this situation? Or I'm trying to hold this rule and I just feel like a mess. Or can I write poetry? These things that are not constrained to those other realms. I rely on Ajahn Pasano and Ajahn Jayasaro. They're just very solid uh, teachers that I have good relationships with, can approach regularly, and who will hit me upside the head, metaphorically speaking, if I'm off the mark. Ajahn Jeff, of course, is an amazing teacher as well, but I have a certain resonance with Longpo and Ajahn Jayasaro. And yeah, and then you dip into other teachings, in various ways. But I'd say finding some basics uh, and sticking with, finding the ones that really hit that spot and diving in deep there. And yeah, but then I don't think once you have a lineage that's your home, you really can wander around within those halls quite freely because the inner coherence mainly isn't compromised. For example, working with breath meditation and a robust practice of the breath energy, Ajahn Sucitto, Ajahn Jeff, Ajahn Jayasaro, and many others really teach a similar path. And then there's the aspect of one of the most difficult things I think as a dedicated practitioner in the lay world is, so many people have this love of this path and want to give themselves to it, but the daily practice doesn't feel enough. And there's always this question of, how do I bring more of this into my life? And so often I feel like the missing ingredient is going on retreat, taking a week and going off to a monastery, especially. Um, and I think in that case, going into a monastery, it's wonderful if you can find the tradition that you feel at home with, but I'd say any monastery will do that's near you, most monasteries. So I used to live near Sarvasti Abbey in Spokane, and I don't completely mesh with the Tibetan tradition. Full-length prostrations are really hard in a Theravada robe, but their morality there is spot on, and the people are sharp and kind and deeply versed in their knowledge, and their practice is beautiful. And so, even as a monk of a different lineage, I would feel wonderful stepping into that environment, even though it's not my meditation practice. So, I'd say in terms of, especially finding a home where you can go on retreat, whatever monastery is near to you, to a certain extent, is valid. And then you can get a little more picky and choosy when it comes to teaching. So you have a lot more, you can just tune in online to something rather than have to actually travel. So you have a bit more freedom. But a monastic environment and dedicated practitioners will generally serve the function of retreat and stepping back, regardless of lineage. Okay, let's see. Christine. Hi, Venerable Nisabho and everyone here. I would like to ask if it is more skillful to journal before meditation or after. I would say before, or sorry, after. Um, Maybe a bit before to get some of those things out of your head. I find that if something's running through my head repeatedly, even an argument with someone, frequently it's because I'm trying to piece together, I'm afraid of forgetting what it is I need to say. And if I just write it out, then it's there and I can let it go, or things I have to do. So I think it is useful to write some stuff down if it's been circulating before you sit briefly. In that sense, journaling is very useful before, but especially I think journaling after is very helpful too. And when I've been on longer periods of retreat, I frequently will journal to see what worked and what didn't. And over time, you gain more and more refined metric and process for what works in your meditation. So, I'll write day in, day out, and it's astounding how you come up with an insight and then the next day it doesn't work, and so you have a new insight. But every few weeks, I'll condense back down to my basic process of like, you do this, then when the mind's in a certain state, you can do this or this, and really draw out the roadmap concretely. Similar, so, and that's very useful to do after meditation because you recall and bring it to mind and you begin to realize what worked. Even if you don't journal, I'd say after every meditation, before you open your eyes, it's helpful to move through the meditation backwards and see what was effective, what wasn't. And if you come up with insights or things that really do work, I think reviewing them regularly and driving them deeper into your heart. We tend to have this idea that once an insight's come up, it's yours forever, but you forget. And those things deserve to be reviewed. So spaced repetition is a method of using flashcards There's an app called Anki on your phone, or a Lightner box if you look it up, Leitner. Ajahn Kovilo is an expert in these things, but many monastics use them. Basically, it's you write down information on flashcards, and then there's a certain schedule where you review cards right before you're about to forget them. And as they become deeper and deeper and more deeply ingrained in your memory, then the reviews become farther and farther apart. So it's a very effective way of learning. And uh, I have my own personal insights and reflections written on cards, and they just come up day after day, month after month, year after year, along with suttas that I want to remember, etc. And it's those things sink in deeply over time. So don't just journal, but also find a way to review your journals. Okay. Sujata, why is it usually not a good idea to talk about attainments with other practitioners other than a teacher? Oh, let me know if it is breaking up too much. Someone typed in the comments that it's breaking up. It'd be good to know if that's the case. We're using a new app right now. I'd say talking about attainments with other practitioners, it's interesting. People are very open about their attainments at the beginning, or the things that they have accessed at the beginning of practice. But almost universally, you see that as practitioners grow, they talk almost not at all about them anymore. They'll share means with one another, like things they did that helped. But you begin to get a sense that there's something very ugly, not ugly, it's not beautiful somehow to share something so precious. And it's really hard to resist if you've had a really, moment of a lot of clarity. And I'd say, at the beginning of practice, it's common and natural to share if you've had a good meditation, and that's, but it's natural. But as you do move on in the practice, monastics, for example, will share skillful means with one another, like sleep schedules, things we have read that have helped us, different skillful means. But almost never do you hear a monastic talking about results. It's all about means and causes and different techniques, but almost never about the result of those things with one another. My sense is that this kind of natural thing happens first because there's just a sense that this is the most precious thing in one's life. And we don't, in the Vinaya, we can't even joke about attainments. You sort of have in some circles, you joke about getting this or that or mind reading, but we can't even joke about that, or shouldn't. Sorry, we shouldn't joke, because it's the most precious thing in a human life. And it's the ultimate goal of the spiritual life for which we all should be striving with our entire hearts. And to hold some things as sacred in that way is worthwhile. It's why we don't put Dhamma books on the floor. We don't put Dhamma books with other books. We raise them up to a high place. We don't, we take on all these little things to remind ourselves. And similarly, we don't joke about these things. We don't talk about them lightly. And there's just a sense that if you sort of reveal what your meditations are like in certain ways, it's the Buddha compared a monastic showing their psychic powers to a lay person. He said, we're not allowed to do it. But he said it was a pretty lewd metaphor. It was a bit like it's someone exposing themselves for a wooden coin. So there's something so intimate about this that you don't just lay it out for anyone to see. And similarly, it's not completely relevant. At the beginning of practice, people tend to have a lot of quickly quite deep experiences sometimes. It's sort of beginner's luck or old karma waiting. But as you practice, a lot of those peaks and valleys disappear, and practice takes on a more gradual flavor and trajectory. Ajahn Panyavado, a really amazing teacher in Thailand, would always say, before you ordain, you need to get one experience of samadhi, because after you ordain, it's going to be a long time, probably. I think what he's speaking to is that when you take on the whole of the practice, the whole Eightfold Path, your heart's being trained in so many ways that sometimes that one aspect of samadhi, which is only one aspect of concentration, it doesn't reach as refined states all the time, because your energy and path are also working at so many other levels of your life. That being said, when through dedicated practice you do come to these states again, if you do, then I think they tend to be much more robust and stable, and you know the map to them. And there's also something with, there can be these peak experiences early in practice, but from my own experience, what that is valuable in the long term is just a sense of a practice that is nourishing and sustaining day after day, which centers you and leaves you feeling full and bright. And you sense it most clearly when you don't have it. I think we all have that experience where you just don't meditate for a few days and your mind is a mess. It's snappy, it's dirty, it's sticky. And you wonder how people can exist without, like, in that state all the time when they don't meditate. And it's because there's no reference point. Once you've gotten used to taking out the trash, you notice the trash. Once you turn up the level of light in a room, the dust is very apparent. So what we're aiming for is that sustaining, nourishing practice. And sometimes that doesn't lend itself to saying I've attained this or that state. It's just, yeah, I sit and I feel really centered afterwards. And that's worth a huge amount. There's no reason to downplay that. And finally, as it can lead to competition, and it's not clear exactly, even with a certain attainment or state of concentration, there's other things in heart which are harder to speak to. Someone might be unbelievably refined in their speech and really have been working on that, and yet maybe their concentration is not great. And if this metric of concentration is held too much to the fore, then all those other aspects get devalued. Whereas what we're really here to do is learn from each other. You find, just like you lean on certain teachers for certain qualities, you find your friends who are really good at certain things. And that's one of the greatest gifts of this life, is finding people who are much better at certain path factors than you are. I know monastics who are just so refined in their speech, are amazing givers. Ajahn Kovilo gave a great talk on this recently. But really valuing that. And also, you don't know where someone's path is. It's mysterious. People who ordain late in life, I was speaking about this recently with a friend, sometimes their path, as soon as they enter on the path, it progresses very quickly, almost because they've seen that first noble truth so intimately and suffered so deeply that grace manifests in them so powerfully. There's a monk in Abhayagiri who ordained quite late in life, and yet he transformed in a way that I've almost never seen. There was a Vietnamese man who recently came on alms round visited me at alms round in Pike Place every morning. he just encountered the practice a year ago after a very hard life. And yet as soon as the faith welled up in him, he began meditating sometimes 5 or 6 or 7 times a day, keeping the 8 precepts every day, meaning he doesn't eat after noon. Everything changed. So all that to say that, yeah, the attainments and things like that, they can really, it's just not healthy. We help each other by giving each other skillful means that have worked, but except in rare occasions, speaking about attainments is something I'd say best left for talk with one's teacher. And monastics aren't supposed to refer to the attainments of this or that Sangha member, because it leads to cult and personality people following personalities. And rather, one is supposed to venerate the idea of the robes and what they represent, regardless. The Buddha, in one case, his stepmother tried to offer him robes, and he said, offer them to the Sangha. I say in no instance is an offering to one person more merit than offering to the Sangha. So even offering to the Buddha was not as powerful as offering to the community and all they represent. And then the sutta goes on. Well, anyways, so. Allison, can you speak to intention before sitting in meditation, perhaps with reference to kilesas and Brahma viharas? Thank you. I think my teacher, Ajahn says that one should begin every meditation session with 10 minutes of loving kindness practice. I think that's good advice. Metta practice, if there's, say, one thing you can recommend to someone that will change their life with 10 minutes a day, it might be 10 minutes of metta. It shifts everything. And it pervades the day. There's something about the adjective boundless abodes, the Brahma viharas. The Brahmas are these gods in Buddhist cosmology that are sort of all-pervading in the cosmos. So this sense of a state that pervades everything, it speaks to both the feeling of the state, but I think you could also think of it as these states creep into every aspect of your life. And it's very interesting. There's a sutta where the Buddha speaks about each enlightenment factor coupled with and imbued with the aspect of loving kindness. So it's almost like they can show up everywhere. They can empower every mind state wholesomely. So I think bringing them in and watching what they do in your life is pretty astounding. They short-circuit the arithmetic of love, which we all, to our detriment, engage in, measuring how much this person loves us, if they care about us as much as we care about them, etc. Because we never win that. That arithmetic never adds up, ever. We fill that goblet of love by what we give, and that's the counterintuitive nature. But if you start practicing loving kindness, you find you feel loved. You're in communion with the world and with something in the world. And the best way to move past loneliness and so many other states is through love and loving kindness. So 10 minutes a day is good. And I'd say right when you wake up and before you go to bed too is helpful. That being said, loving kindness practice, and I've spoken to this recently in a few talks, you have to be quick on your feet because the frequently where you need to focus that love is yourself. There's a method of spiritual bypassing where you come into a meditation with the intention to sit down and do this, and you're like, all right, loving kindness practice, bring to mind this person, and then spread it their way and sort of shoot metta rays at them. But it's very easy to miss the fact that you're the one feeling bruised and tired. And in fact, part of your momentum and unstoppable mind is just you trying subconsciously not to be with that. So loving kindness can just be, and should just be, always a careful attentiveness to that first truth in yourself. Before anything else, make sure you're seeing your own suffering. Feel the shape and tenor of your heart. Where's the bruising? Where's the weight? Where's the knotting? Where's the anger? And can you just not spread cotton candy towards that, not shoot more pink metta at it in these sort of visualizations, but just hold the bruise. Just acknowledge your suffering. Be with it. Let yourself rest. And a word can really help with that. You can say forgiveness, or I'm just human. I'm just human. I use that a lot. I messed up so many times. And just being like, you're just human. You're just human. You're only human. And yeah, and then you can, use more conventional techniques. Imagine light there and resting in it. But that's very good. And then other techniques I've spoken to of skillful loving kindness are shrinking people, bringing them into your heart, imagining them older and younger on their deathbed and as a child and holding their hand. Imagining, if you have trouble spreading loving kindness to yourself, imagining yourself inhabiting the caring gaze of a friend towards you. If you're having trouble forgiving yourself, imagine that you're the friend listening to your own confession, and what would you say? And so frequently it's like, of course, it's okay. We all mess up. Just take a step back from yourself sometimes. And yeah, so we only get to access the other three truths once we've passed through the dark valley of the first. That's grace and humility. So when you're doing metta practice, it can't be another means of spiritual bypassing. As to kilesa and how you set up intention with that. And just to say that this pervasion of loving kindness that comes from initiating a meditation with it in a day, it does make its way into everything. You hold the breath with a certain amount of love. Mindfulness becomes more heartfulness. You can, unwelcome mind states, you can, calm, open the door, or, give them a nice smile and then close the door and let them on their way. Say, thank you for coming. You're not needed right now. So it can pervade all aspects of meditation, regardless of technique. In terms of kilesa, defilement, and what intention you should set up with reference to that in your meditation, I would say it's fair to say that we can't control what defilement arises in our mind, but karma is created when we engage with it and buy into it and act on craving towards it. And you can feel that distinction. An aversive thought shows up and you follow it and you get involved in the fake argument, or you begin berating yourself. And as soon as you catch that, you can either acknowledge the issue and sort of stop and breathe, or you can continue to buy into it and get drunk on it and carry it along. And that's engaging in kilesa. And I'd say it's very possible and practicable not to prevent kilesa from arising. That's impossible. But to say that I won't act on it in terms of a mental act, I won't buy into it, I won't follow it, and I'll make sure of that. So that's good. And then just to be gentle, kilesa manifests in such nuanced ways when we're, berating ourselves for berating ourselves, or, ripping ourselves away from some fantasy with brutal hands to bring us, shove us back into the breath. The Buddha has an analogy in the Upakilesa Sutta where he speaks about how one holds a meditation object, and it's like you hold a bird. If you hold it too tightly, it dies. If you hold it too loosely, it flies away. And we just tend to grip that thing to death. So notice that gripping, that's kilesa. And I think that's a pretty safe thing to keep an eye on for most Westerners, and people raised in today's environment. Is there's probably going to be some kilesa manifesting as control and self-aversion. Okay. I think that might be... picture is very blurry. I see, Stan. Thank you. That's helpful to know. Yeah, we're trying a new program, so we'll see what can be done. What I'll do right now is say farewell to everyone. Thank you for joining, and we'll have it next week at the same time. And then I'm going to turn off this computer and leave the phone on and see if the picture improves. And it might just cut everything off, so we'll see. Oh, actually, I don't think I can just do that on this computer. Well, say Levi. Take care, everyone.